Hi. Hi, it's Wendy the Witch. I'm continuing to stitch my friend's dog jacket. And I was just thinking about my experience in dismantling the patriarchy within my own psyche. And my desire to dismantle the patriarchy is, I would say that it was born from trauma. Like, it was born from the pain that I had experienced at the hands of misogyny and conditioned behaviors that are damaging to those of us who are raised as women. That's where it birthed from. And it has had so many layers, and I'm happy to say that in many ways I have deconditioned a lot of my patriarchal programming, but there's also a lot more that I need to do. But there are certain aspects of it that I can speak to, and I want to speak to them because maybe they can help somebody out there who's struggling. And one of the biggest ways that I conditioned my deconditioned the patriarchal programming that was installed in me before birth was that I was taught that being straight is the only option. And that is not just an experience that I've had. It's a very, very common experience across everybody, across the entire planet. And there's so many things that can be said about this in terms of origins and everything like that, but I'm not really going to get into that stuff, mostly because I don't actually have solid facts about it. And I'm trying to do this thing where I don't speak facts or speak things that I think are facts that I don't actually have the facts of. So instead I'm just going to focus on my personal experience, because my personal experience is mine and no one can take that away from me. Nobody can tell me that it's wrong. And there's power in that for everybody. So I'm queer. Specifically, I identify as bisexual at this time. And discovering my sexuality has been an interesting path. And I'm so grateful for it, because now that I've really, truly discovered who I am, I'm able to live as I am. And that is like one of the main keys of being a happy person is that we are able to live as ourselves. And I don't really need to say this, but I'm going to anyway. We still don't live in a world where people who are queer can 100% be themselves in society. There's definitely been progress over the last century, maybe. But there's still much work to be done. There's still much oppression that exists. And that is the reason that that's why coming out is so important to people who are queer, because it's a process and it's different for every single person. And it also means something different to every single person. And really, I would say learning that I was queer and deconditioning homophobia within myself was a huge thing. I never considered myself to be someone who was homophobic necessarily. But there's this aspect of heteronormativity that is ingrained in everyone, that was ingrained in me as well, that I had to recognize and let go of. And that heteronormativity is being raised in a society where it wasn't normalized that being attracted to people who weren't straight men, that was never like really presented as an option to me. Like, and this is a society thing. Like, it's really interesting because I always like consciously felt that like I could be gay, like, you know, and even my parents, they said to me when I was young, like, if you're gay, that's okay, you know? And even though that happened, there was still a subconscious block to it that exists because we live in a heteronormative society. And for me, that honestly just manifested as not knowing it was an option. Like, I knew it was an option, but I wasn't wired to think it was an option. I was wired to believe that heteronormativity was the norm. I was wired to believe that being hetero was the norm, hence the term heteronormativity. And heteronormativity is birthed from a colonial patriarchal system that puts women below men, if we're talking in the binary, right? Obviously, I mean, I'm non-binary, so my queer identity lives outside of the binary, but if we're talking about history, and, you know, where heteronormativity and it's like closely related homophobia, but if we're talking about like where heteronormativity was birthed, it was in the confines of like this power structure in which women served men. Because when you think of like, when I think of being queer and finding that empowerment through understanding I was queer, all of a sudden, my world shifted to a huge deconditioning process. And that was the deconditioning process of being attracted to straight men. And this is my whole point. There's obviously so many other layers to it, but this is my main point about my experience, is that I went through this whole process of trying to understand if I was actually attracted to straight men because I had dated straight men my entire life. And I was so unhappy. It's a really loud bird outside. It's like, yeah, speak the truth. What was I saying? I had dated straight men my whole life. And I was so sad and unfulfilled. And when you get to a place where you're so empty and sad and unfulfilled and you're not finding anything that you want or need within who you're spending your time with or connecting your body with, that leads one to start questioning their reality. And I really did. I started questioning that. And I started thinking to myself, wait, so I've been told all this time that dating straight men is the way to go. So I tried that out. And I wasn't really into it. But there weren't many models around me of behavior. There weren't, I didn't grow up around a lot of queer people. So there wasn't actually, and there wasn't many queer people on TV, in media. You know, growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. It was like kind of around, but not really. Not in my world. So there was no point of reference for how to do that. And when you live so deeply in a heteronormative structure, you just live in that because that's all you know or understand. And so when I had this realization that I had just never seen the way to go about being a queer person, and that was like kind of in a big way the key to me discovering this part of who I truly am, that's when everything started to change. Because what I'm so happy to report that I have discovered is that 99.9999% of the time, I am not attracted to straight men. I'm really, really not. And to live a life before that, where that's all I was dating, that was the only people that I was looking for those types of relationships with, that's like a very, it's a painful experience, honestly. And that's something that homophobic people don't understand. People who are homophobic actively, a lot of them don't understand that. And so heteronormativity and homophobia is ingrained in us so deeply that I actually had to get to a point of like deep unfulfillment and unhappiness and repeating patterns with toxic men in order to like really understand that I am not attracted to straight men. I'm really not. But also what I've learned, which is another conversation for another day, is that I'm demisexual. So it's fun because I can look at some straight men who are well-intending, and I can have love for them. I can, have them as friends in my life. I can even be like, oh, wow, that guy's attractive. But it's so objective, like it's so observational that it's not attraction. It's just, cool, that guy's hot. Like sometimes I'll be with my friends who are bisexual who do like straight men. So like I'm bisexual, but I don't like straight men. But I have other friends who are bisexual who do like straight men. And like, if we see a guy, you can't tell anyone's sexuality from looking at them, but, sometimes straight guys stick out. It's just like, the gaydar. So if we see a straight guy, like, who's attractive, I'll say to my bisexual friends who like straight guys, I'll be like, yo, that guy's hot, go for it. Do you know what I mean? But I have no interest in doing that. Like, I know that I'm not going to be into them because I'm not into straight guys. So it's this like beautiful discovery that allows me to actually be who I am. And actually it allows me to like appreciate people for who they are. You know, like understanding that I am not attracted to straight men allows me to have more compassion for them, because for a long time I was so angry at them. And sometimes, of course, I still get angry at them, especially when they're not taking responsibility for their misogynist programming and they're perpetuating systems of inequality, and they're not really taking accountability for their actions. I get mad at them then. But any other time, just knowing I'm not attracted to them takes me out of this heteronormative patterning that requires me to act a certain way with them. Because if we are in heteronormative patterning, it's this, we automatically step into these gender roles, which I obviously don't align with because I'm non-binary, right? So it just automatically feeds into this behavior loop of how women are supposed to interact with men. And that patterning, in my opinion and in my experience, is a huge problem, and it caused me a lot of pain and it caused a lot of trauma, because sometimes in those patterns and in those roles, that is where traumatic instances can happen. And so deconditioning all of that, understanding all of that, has actually allowed me to create more space to meet and like befriend men that I really like, because I'm no longer in that patterning of like, oh, I have to interact with this man in a certain way because I want him to find me attractive, or I want him to respect me, or if he doesn't think that he can do me, then he will treat me differently. I've kind of like busted out of that in my experience, which comes with its implications, which is also a discussion for another time, but it's very freeing, because in that way I'm just being who I am. And there is nothing more sweet and amazing in life than to be who you are. And who you're attracted to is a huge part of that. Who you love romantically is a huge part of that. And the last thing that I'll say on this little discussion about deconditioning heteronormativity is that it doesn't only exist within the binary, like the gender binary, and in straight relationships. Heteronormativity is weaved throughout all of society. It is even weaved intricately into some elements of queer culture. And so queer people also are not necessarily exempt from deconditioning heteronormativity. Just because you realize that you might be gay or queer, that doesn't mean automatically that you have looked at the patterns of heteronormativity in your life and chosen differently. And I'm not saying that as a judgment, it's just fact. Because heteronormativity and homophobia and all of that are very close, but they are separate things. And there's even some dynamics that I've seen in queer culture with lesbians, for example. Not shit-talking lesbians. I love lesbians. But just as an example, there's still heteronormative patterning that happens in those dynamics and within the culture of queer people. So, all that to say, heteronormativity is weaved through almost, if not all, aspects of modern society. I feel like I can say that pretty confidently. And that's just, I mean, that also has come from like my experience of learning that I was non-binary, you know? Learning that I was non-binary was also a huge deconditioning of heteronormativity, because in learning I was non-binary, I really learned that I actually didn't really resonate with most of the preconceived gender roles that separates masculine and feminine. Sometimes I vibe with masculine and feminine energies and the balance of those. Like, I totally get it. And sometimes, you know, it really does make sense to me. But that, to me, doesn't exist all the time. People are people. I'm a person. And as a non-binary person, I'm like, yeah, I'm like, I see the preconceived structures of the binary and of the heteronormative binary specifically, and I saw those and I was like, no, not for me. That's not really who I truly am. And there's nothing wrong with it, really. Like, there's nothing wrong with identifying within the binary and identifying with being a man or being a woman. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem happens when society goes to the extreme and says that is the only way to experience this life. Is if you have a wiener, you're a man, and if you have a I hate having to censor myself for YouTube. It sucks. And if you have a pussy, I'll just say it. If you have a pussy, then you're a woman. Like, that's where the problem lies, is saying that those are the only two options, because that view is very, very small. That view puts us into these preconceived norms and roles, which contribute to this power system of men having power over women. And I saw that and I was like, nope. That has been a source of pain in my life, and I will not live the remainder of my life in that way. And I will tell my story about that. Because at the end of the day, deconditioning my heteronormativity is about freeing myself. You know, when I first started deconditioning my attraction to straight men, I had fear. I was like, oh, this is something that I've always known, and there was comfort in that. And there was a part of me that was really sad, because I was like, oh, I really want to have a loving relationship with a man. And I was sad. I was like, if I decondition this, maybe I'll never have that. And then right after that happened, I met a man who I love. But the whole point coming back to the deconditioning part, the whole point is I knew that I had to decondition heteronormativity in order to free myself so that I could choose for myself. And I think that is one of the most important take-home messages of deconditioning heteronormativity. It's about freeing yourself from the dogma of gender roles and the roles of men and women in relationships and in society. It's about freeing yourself from the confines of those in order to choose for yourself. Because I was like, I will not live my life in heteronormativity because I'm told that's what I'm supposed to do. No way. Not doing that. Instead, I'm going to decondition heteronormativity within myself so that I may choose for myself. And there was fear. There was fear when I made that choice, because I was like, oh, what if I find that I'm no longer attracted to straight men? And then this thing that I always knew or was holding on to won't exist anymore. And maybe I just won't find love, because we're also conditioned to heteronormative straight love, and that, you know, true love is finding a straight man to love, which is not true. So there was fear. I had fear. But I knew that if I deconditioned these preconceived notions of society, that I would find my truth and I would be free to choose who to love. And I would be free to choose the truth of who I am. And that's why I think that every single person should decondition the heteronormative structures in which they live, or at least understand them. Doesn't matter if you're straight, bisexual, queer, gay, pansexual, whatever. Doesn't matter who you are or what your sexual orientation is. I think it's important for every single person to question and dismantle the preconceived notions of heteronormativity. Because once you do that, you can choose from the menu of options of desire. You can choose who you are. You can choose your thoughts. You can choose what you want. Because once you've deconditioned that, you're free of the preconceived pathways or notions that you are given to you as a child. You know, babies are born and people are like, oh, we're gonna do a gender reveal. Oh, that baby, that kid is this gender. So that means that they automatically go into this category and they will fulfill this role. That's pretty much what gender reveal parties are. Sorry, not sorry. It's saying, we've identified what your genitals are, and so this is who you're gonna be. And that is just not equality, is it? No siree. That's not equality. So, yeah. Based on my rhyme, I think that's the end of what I want to communicate at this time. And I just want to share that because that is my experience. And Has it been easy? No. Has it been always easy to be a queer person in a heteronormative world? No. But I would pick being my true self over heteronormativity any day. And that's what I hope for you. I hope that you have the courage to question your conditioning so that you can find out who you truly are. So that you can find out, the bird is going again. Yes, we're speaking truth. So that, it's so loud, I almost can't talk. I hope this for you too, so that you can free yourself from the conditioning thrust upon you. And with that wisdom, you can discern who you are and what you want and what is true and authentic to you, because being true and authentic to yourself is the fastest way to happiness. And it's the fastest way to a more equitable world as well. Yeah. Thanks for watching.